The blood toll. It didn't matter that my feet ached. I'd been tracking the raiders that had attacked my village for weeks. They were oblivious to me following them, always staying at a good distance away to prevent them from finding me. They were cautious, and had prisoners they had to guard that slowed them down. They settled in the skeleton of an abandoned building. Remnants of brick walls surrounded them, and the shelves of burnt-out cars littered the outside. The shelves, those that hadn't been looted, were completely empty, picked clean decades ago of anything useful. I could smell the fire they lit and sat around. 2 guards patrolled to ensure the group's safety. Occasionally, I thought one of them may have spotted me, but they didn't. The group had grown bold from the success of their raids and savagery. There were 9 members I could see, and 2 captives from the latest village they plundered. Their hands were bound behind their backs, and they looked around with wide, frightened eyes. I could smell meat cooking on the fire, and sure enough, I saw a human leg being roasted. Cannibalism wasn't uncommon. One of the captives wept, begged to be freed, and one of the raiders stood and walked over to give them a sharp kick in the ribs.
Shut the fuck up! If you don't stop crying, I'll give you a reason to cry.
The captive was quiet, and a burst of laughter emerged from the raider group. They didn't carry any standards or signs of what group they were.
Quiet. I think I heard something.
One of the guards hissed, focused their attention across from me. They all fell silent and waited.
We're under attack!
He warned, aimed his rifle and fired at the unseen enemy. This chaos was perfect. However, I wanted to know who was attacking them. A group of people wearing coats of human skin charged. Their weapons were made of pieces of bone and twisted metal. They let out roars and what they lacked in technology. They made up for in numbers and a desire to kill indiscriminately. I heard of this clan, and while I wanted nothing but revenge for my village, I also wanted to live. My village called them the Skin Weavers, and word about them had been brought by traders coming from other settlements. Slowly, I crept forward, wanting as much distance between them and me as possible. The captives cried out to be released or be killed. I never thought I'd actually see any of them. A real skin weaver. Now close to the captives, it was hard to ignore their humanity and their fears. At one point, I would have tried to save them, or I would have ended their pain. It prolonged my survival having them used as bait. The skin weavers grabbed them, clubbing them repeatedly until the final cries stopped. I heard the cutting and the stripping of skin from flesh, isolated whimpers as they tried to crawl along only to be sport. Anything that could go up in flames was put to the torch. The smoke would act as a beacon to other groups to come and take their turn, to pick the bones. The gamble of finding a group who would help was far too low. I crawled away. My eyes had long adjusted to the late night, until I found a place I could rest and hide. I found a broken brick wall with a fallen tree log, and wedged myself between them and waited. At least they didn't have hunting dogs with them that could track me down. In the distance, I watched and hoped none of them would find me. The next morning, I woke up with a chill of mist stinging my face. Smoke circled above the charred outline of the building. Crows had already come to pick at the corpses. The skin weavers dragged off any survivors, and never stayed in the same place for long. I didn't want to know what happened to them. I crept out with my trusty knife ready to strike, and looked down at the bloodshed. I saw a man lying on his side in a pool of blood. He had been stripped of his clothing, and the skin had been ripped or severed off the lower parts of his body. There were many large chunks of flesh that had been cut or bitten off. I would have felt for him if I didn't know what his raider group had already done. He wasn't the only one who would receive violent treatment. Droplets of blood trickled down into a puddle. I looked up and saw a flayed man. The guard I saw earlier. The skin on his back had been pulled off to the side like wings. His arms outstretched and twisted. At least, what remained of one was. His bones had been broken in several places, causing his ribs to bulge. His tongue hung down because his jaw wasn't there. He had been partially disemboweled. His intestines hung down from his body, and swayed in the smoke-filled breeze. And worse for him, he was still alive. His head lifted when he saw me. He groaned, and I don't know how he was selected to receive this punishment. I left him to his fate. There was a blood pool where the captives were kept. They were gone. No mercy shown. And it looked like half the raiders were gone. I didn't want to know what their fate would be. With their bodies still warm, I rummaged through the supplies left behind. Took some water, some medicine, and some items that had been plundered from my village back home. It wouldn't return people's lives to them, but their families would have mementos to remember them.
Hands up and turn around.
I froze. I was surprised he didn't shoot first. I looked over my shoulder to see one of the guards from earlier. He had a bloody makeshift bandage on his wound at his waist and looked pale from blood loss. He also had a handgun aimed at my torso. Ammo was rare now, but that didn't mean I wanted to take a chance. Easy now, I answered, putting my hands up and slowly turned around, still crouched on the ground. I wasn't sure how many others managed to escape or would suddenly appear. I didn't want to end it because of his easy trigger finger. I played the only card I had. Your wound hasn't been treated properly. It will get infected. His eyes narrowed suspiciously and aimed it at my head, threatening me. The skin weavers are full of disease. Do you want to risk it? I insisted, having nothing else left to lose. He paused, considering his options.
Fine. Put the knife down and drop any weapons you have on the ground.
Do you want to waste time? Okay, that nearly did it. I opened my hands and tossed my knife on the ground. I lifted my shirt at the front and back to show I didn't have anything concealed. Then the lower part of my jeans to show there was nothing around my ankles. Now satisfied, he lowered his gun and rested his back on the wall for support. He winced and opened up the bandages. It was already inflamed with the start of an infection. The gaping wound would also need stitches.
Don't try anything. I won't hesitate to kill you.
He sat with his back on the wall. It will need to be stitched up. It wasn't an ideal situation, tending to his wounds nor the location. I pulled some thread out of one of the shirts, took the last remaining needle from the medical kit. I dropped the thread in the antiseptic and cleaned the wound. He would need to have it cleaned regularly. My stitching had never been great.
Hurry up.
He growled at me and poked the barrel into my arm. Do you want me to do this or not? I snapped. I can do this properly or mess it up. He blinked, stared at me, and I don't think he expected my response.
I can kill you.
A warning dripped from his words. You kill me and you die of infection. It was a gamble. Fortunately, he wanted to live more than I expected him to. Infection and disease was more dangerous than many gave credit for. Dying from infection was often slower and more painful.
Just hurry up about it then.
He winced. His teeth grit tightly together, and his body tensed from the pain. Lowered the gun, and I may have pressed harder than I needed to, wiping away any dirt, dabbing it with a strongly scented disinfectant. I didn't realize at first he was so gaunt, his face drawn in and his ribs protruded from his sides. On closer inspection, it looked like a stab wound, rather than the filthy bite of a human mouth. Just because he had me at gunpoint didn't mean I was going to make it as painless for him as possible. I was far rougher than I needed to be. I didn't think of any of the raiders as being human. They were simply a threat that needed to be exterminated. I took the makeshift thread, squinted my eyes, while I put it through the eye of the needle and began to stitch it up. My hands were coated in his blood. We didn't speak to each other while I worked. I needed to think of a way to kill him so I could report back to my village about what had happened.
Don't try anything.
He warned, grit his teeth, exhaled, and thought of anything other than the pain.
Where are you from? It's been days since we passed through anywhere.
I stared up at his face to discover any sign of deceit. Either he was a gifted liar or simply didn't know. I was traveling to find more settlements to trade with, but I lost most of my supplies. I lied, pretended I was focused on stitching the wound. I could feel his gaze on me and finally it relaxed.
We'll need to leave soon. I don't know when the flesh stealers will come back to finish this off.
The skin weavers rarely return. We should be okay until the animals come to eat the remains. It was the first time I heard them called something else. I did the final stitch. I nodded the end, leaned close, and bit the thread. It was strange having a casual conversation with someone you were going to kill.
You call them skin weavers? Huh.
He grunted, interested.
They tend to circle wealthier communities and grab the traitors, so you're lucky they didn't find you.
So, why was your group on the road?
We had to try to find one of the members' little sisters. She was taken when she was pretty young, and we finally found the group that took them.
He leaned down, checking the stitch work before I dressed it with a clean bandage. I didn't believe a word of it. I saw the survivors, and couldn't forget that human fucking leg being roasted. So, what now? Where are you going to go?
Back home. You're welcome to come with me. It's the least I can do for patching me up.
It could definitely be a trap. Physically, he was in no shape to drag me back there, and having a willing victim would be perfect. I would also be able to learn the location, if the rest of my village ever wanted to raid them in return. An eye for an eye. Now I looked at him closely, and I noticed more about his physical features. He had dark grey eyes, hooded and wary, surrounded by a darker colour. His skin was washed out from the blood loss, with that typical grime that coated most people who spent time on the road, and blood from the conflict. His face and hands were weathered, and his features were otherwise unremarkable. He must have noticed me looking at him and my silence.
I promise you'll be safe with me.
I doubted it, but I had no option. I'll come with you. I need to keep track of different settlements and places to trade with. I lied, and I hoped he didn't realize it. We walked around the remnants of the campsite and began to loot the remnants of his comrades. I lifted the rifle, still in the torn hand of the guard, and looted the ammunition he carried in a bag nearby. I couldn't find his corpse, and guessed he was one of those who had been dragged away. I put the safety on, slung it over my shoulder, and lifted some pieces of food. I had to avoid stepping on entrails. When I saw a skin weaver up close for the first time, I have never been within arm's reach of one, and only, thankfully, at a distance. The human skin was weathered with different skin tones, roughly sewn together, and I could even see the freckles of some of the unfortunate victims. He had been shot in the chest, likely by the guard before he in turn was overrun. The skin weaver was so human, just like me. If I had been born into their family, would I have become exactly like the corpse? I leaned close, lifted his top lip, and saw all his teeth had been filed into sharp points. I snapped my hand back. The skin weaver twisted his hair into horns using dry blood. I wasn't sure if it was his used in some ritual or someone else's. I checked his pockets for anything of use, and he carried nothing. Not even junk. I heard my newfound companion behind me, rummaging around and looking for items that could be used. We should be moving on, I insisted, having come up empty with anything else of value. I walked with him along what had once been a road. The asphalt was barely visible. It was in small chunks around what had been the roadway. Rusted out remnants of cars and trucks lined the sides. Both of us kept pausing, listening for any changes, and kept an eye out for anyone else. He was looking for people in his group who could come and rescue us. My reason for searching was entirely different. When night came, we left the road and found an old van to use as shelter. We ignored the skeleton of the previous occupant and huddled together to try to keep warm. I shivered, frantically rubbed my hands together, and I could see the condensation of my breath. How far until we get to your people?
Probably 3 or 4 days, depending on the weather. And this,
he gestured to his wound,
will slow us down. I don't like traveling without a group, so we're gonna need to stay off the road from now on.
I wasn't against this idea. However, much of the plant matter by the side of the road was thick and difficult to travel through.
It's better than us being easily spotted.
I nodded, checked his wound again, and cleaned it as best I could. We both ate some questionable, dried meat, and were too concerned about safety to light a fire outside for warmth. I'm not sure when, but the pair of us drifted off to sleep. I woke up to a scraping sound on the van. I could barely make it out through the rain and thunder, and hoped it could have been a stray tree branch. I tried not to make a sound. I couldn't see anything through the barely patched up back window. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, and I remembered there were no trees near us. My hand gripped my new traveling partner's arm, shook gently, then roughly to try to wake him up, and the scraping sounds kept going, gradually getting louder. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear some kind of footprints. The loud sound continued, and I hoped whatever it was wouldn't try and come inside. I heard a loud bang. Something was on top of the van, striking at it, enough to leave a dent, and the noise came from all sides, surrounding us. He slept through the whole thing while I shivered, closed my eyes, and silently prayed that it would leave us alone. When my eyes opened, it was morning. I was curled up, wrapped in my traveling partner's jacket. The van door was open, and he was examining the outside. He bit his bottom lip, ran his hand through his hair, and I shuffled out to look at the damage. Long scratch marks were left in the metal. The long gashes covered the length of the van. I couldn't tell if it was from a blade or from claws. There were parts where the scratches were so deep, and had just managed to penetrate the metal. Do you know what could have done this?
No,
He answered.
I've never seen anything like this before.
I had a feeling he spent a majority of his time on the road, and had seen far more than I had. What do you think it could have been? He didn't answer. Not right away.
We need to move on.
A part of me wanted to stay close to the van in safety, limited as it was. Ultimately, I knew whatever it was would return, and we made our way through a drainage ditch. We came to a thick muddy part, and tried to make our way through it.
Careful, it is too high.
There were many reasons why this was too dangerous, and we traveled close to the trees, while caution was necessary. Every so often we would pause and check our surroundings. He never complained about his wound, actively trying to disguise how sickly he was, and how much he was slowing us down. If we were attacked, he wouldn't be able to run far or fast, and that concerned me. Was I becoming invested in his survival beyond my own? I had to remind myself how many people died in my village, their mutilated bodies and the wailing of their family members. I had to have revenge. We need to be careful to watch for any signs of hostile animals or people, especially whatever attacked us in the van. There was a slope that led up to a road. We heard a large group of people. We were quiet. Any group on the road was a threat. They didn't see us. I looked through my rifle at them, and I could see they were well armed. Most had some type of rifle, handguns, along with swords and knives. Even at a distance, I could see how well maintained everything was, in comparison to everybody else I had ever encountered. They were possibly the descendants of former soldiers. My gaze slowly moved from one to another. I made eye contact with him and shook my head. There was no way we could take them down. He beckoned me to come down from the slope, and I did. We moved into the rugged forest area, ignoring the various remnants from the old world. There were scraps of tents, shoes, and other belongings people used before the world was destroyed. Nothing was valuable, and we didn't bother going through it.
If we go through the mountain pass, we should be able to go behind them, and then back on the road.
He answered, out of breath, and slid down the trunk of a tree. He was pale, shivered not from cold, and I could smell the foul aroma of the infection spreading. We didn't have enough to care for him, and the constant walking was taking a heavy toll.
We can't risk getting caught by them.
Are there any trading settlements nearby? They might have someone who can patch you up better than I can. He pointed in the opposite direction.
Not too far. I don't know how they will treat us. It has been some time since I've been there. The leadership could have changed.
It was a gamble. I figured we didn't have much of a choice now. I needed to know where his main settlement was, and for that, I needed him alive. It is worth it. Soon you won't be able to run.
All right.
He grumbled.
What's your name anyway?
Jess. You?
Trev. Short for Trevor. Apparently it was one of my uncle's names.
I didn't really care. So, do you know who the boss is?
Yes. This is when we were useful and had things to trade. Right now, we're wounded beggars with nothing to offer except our flesh.
He groaned. Stood and together we walked. Occasionally I had to help support him. His arm around my shoulders, and I hoped we weren't going to be attacked. I hated moving in fading light, and the dark of night made it difficult to move. He couldn't keep his body warm anymore. His legs dragged and he murmured,
We need to get you to safety.
It was nighttime, and we saw spotlights above a large metal gate. It had been patched up many times with barbed wire or sheets of metal. Behind it we could smell food cooking and see the smoke of their fires.
Oi, what do you want?
I could see a heavy-set man with a thick beard and a cigarette hanging from his mouth, watching us. I couldn't tell how many guns were aimed at us, but I didn't want to take any chances. I put my hands up, careful not to put Trev off balance, and shakily he too did the same gesture. We have a few items to trade, and he needs to be patched up, I called out.
Nah, go on, fuck off, you don't have anything.
The guard grunted, gestured with his rifle in the direction we had come.
Bruce? Brucey, it's me, Trev.
He put his head up, and it seemed Bruce recognized him.
Oh shit, Trev, I didn't recognize you. Come in, the gate's opening up.
He called down to some people below.
Open it up and close it as soon as they come through.
The gate slid open, enough for us to enter, before it was immediately closed and locked again. The lights were minimal, as settlements went. This one was quite prosperous, and there were several tiny stores near the entrance. I couldn't see deep enough to see what the rest was like. A few guards watched us with their weapons ready.
Oh, Trev, it's good to see you.
Still with a cigarette hanging from his lip, he walked over and pulled Trev into a massive bear hug, completely ignoring the fact he was injured. Trev groaned, slapped his friend's back, and the pair of them walked toward a makeshift building with a red cross with a white background above it. I followed them, listening to their conversation.
What happened?
Fucking flesh stealers got me.
He grumbled.
We were headed back to what had happened. Most of them didn't make it. Maybe a couple made their way here.
Bruce shook his head.
You're the first I've seen. The roads have gotten more active of late. It's good for us, but not for any sorry bastard traveling around the place.
Yeah, well, keep an eye out for me.
Will do.
Bruce looked back at me briefly, questioning who I was.
We saw a large military group, well organized and equipped. Do you know them?
Yeah, just traded some food and water with them. Good lads.
You can never tell on the road whether you can trust someone.
Hey, that's true.
He paused.
Who's your friend?
She found me and healed me. She's a good one.
Why was she out by herself?
Yeah.
I would be equally suspicious too. Fortunately, a woman with a bright smile led them inside, sat Trev down on a bed and said,
You're injured. Come on in and I'll take a look at you to see what we can do.
Val, I told you, no freebies, but this fella's alright though.
He smacked Trev's shoulder and left. I tried to make myself as unnoticeable as possible. They didn't check or take our weapons from us.
On the house for him, and who he came here with.
He looked in my direction before leaving the tent, and I tried to stay out of the way. A teenage boy came to take our weapons. Trev handed his over, and I hesitated before giving them up. They were placed inside a locker.
Sit up and I'll see to you.
Val guided Trev kindly. She took out a pair of scissors, and a teenage boy brought over a tray of supplies. I couldn't remember when I saw so many supplies available. The same teenage boy disappeared out the back.
Hey, come on over. I don't bite.
she teased.
What caused this?
Soon the wound was exposed. The aroma of pus was repulsive, and the sight equally so.
It's good you came in when you did because the infection is spreading. I won't lie to you. You'll need to stay here for a while to recuperate.
Val turned to look at me with steady green eyes, and I instantly got mothering vibes from her. A healer. She reminded me of a doctor I had at my village, who tenderly cared for people.
Attacked by flesh sealers on the road. My group were heading back, and it looks like I was the sole survivor so far.
He winced, looked down at the wound.
Fuck, it's bad.
Sweat coated his brow. Trev looked worse for wear, and as much as I hated to admit it, I was worried for him as a person. I folded my arms, looked at the ground, and was disgusted with myself.
Hey, why don't you take a seat, or you can head off to get something to eat if you want. Thomas will take you.
She invited me. My gaze shot up. Okay, I don't know where to go.
Just out back, Tom?
I was led out back by the same teenager who let us in. He never spoke. There were people gathered around rustic-looking fires, cooking and talking among themselves. I gripped my jacket around my body to keep the chill out. I left my weapons in the locker since I had no choice, and I felt naked without them. I would get something hot to eat. I was given a bowl filled with a warm, hearty stew. I polished it off quickly and was given an extra bowl. When I returned with extra food, I overheard the pair of them talking, their heads close, and they were whispering.
We had to do it. I didn't want to.
I know. You need to defend yourselves. It's the way things are now.
If we didn't do it, they would have attacked us. They already have.
I got closer. Their conversation became less structured. I hid behind some filing cabinets and cardboard boxes.
I didn't want to do it.
I know. You don't need to convince me.
They stole our daughters from us, so after we attacked, we took 2 prisoners with us. We needed to make sure they weren't going to come after us.
I didn't know whether to believe this or not, but Val clearly did. Her hand rested on his arm. Trev was on one of the beds, his chest and freshly bandaged wound exposed. They seemed to be close. He still looked pale, exhausted, but new life was returning to him. There was a cord in his arm with fluid going into it. I've never seen this before, but I heard about it. Trev had stopped sweating. He looked a little more stable, and I wondered whether he received antibiotics or not, rare as they were.
We were attacked 3 weeks before we made camp, and the fucking bastards stole our food. We did what we had to make it. One of my...
He couldn't look at her.
I don't think anyone else made it. If there were survivors, they probably would have been dragged back to the Skinweavers camp. And you know what happens there.
Val visibly shivered and looked uncomfortable.
Life on the road is hard, and I'm sorry. I hope if there were survivors, they die swiftly and without too much torture.
Her words were comforting.
What about the woman with you?
I don't know. I found her at the camp. She patched me up and helped bring me here.
It's strange how you found her there after.
What are you...
I let out a squeal when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I saw the same teenage boy who let us in rest his hand on mine to give it a gentle pull. He shook his head in warning, and that was when I realized he was mute. He beckoned for me to follow with his hand. The other 2 were quiet now. I could feel their eyes on me, and I followed the unknown teenage boy. I felt like I was listening in on a conversation I shouldn't have overheard. Am I in danger? He shook his head, then opened his mouth, pointed at his missing tongue. Someone had cut his tongue out. His hands clenched and shook, and I realized he must have been frustrated. He wrote on a scrap piece of paper in rough handwriting.
Stay calm.
I was confused when I heard a loud screeching cry from outside the walls of the settlement. I heard screams, and instantly guards ran to their posts to prepare for battle. They carried rifles, bows, and crossbows. Outside the lights were turned on, and the screeching from outside changed. The skin weavers were always said to be scared of bright lights. My mute companion led me back to the medical building. Val had armed herself with a handgun in case they managed to get through. Trev, my unlikely traveling companion, was asleep, likely drugged through pain medication. Everyone had a role to play in the defense of the settlement.
Here, take this.
She handed me my rifle, my knife, and a belt to put it around my waist. I felt so much better with a weapon in my hands. What about him? I asked, gestured lazily with my thumb at him. My Remington was still loaded. It wouldn't be enough for an attack, but some well-aimed shots might do the enemy a decent amount of damage.
He can't do anything anyway.
She frowned.
If they manage to get in, try to kill him before they take him.
Val placed supplies to remove bullets and sew up wounds on the counter, ready to treat anyone who was brought in during the fighting. The teenage boy assisted her, and I watched them ready themselves for the wounded they expected to arrive. Outside, some had buckets of water in case of fire, and others had already herded the children somewhere safe. I went outside to see if I could help in any way.
Get to the wall. They're at the north gate.
Bruce yelled. His voice boomed above the warning sirens. He grabbed me roughly by my jacket arm, pulled me along behind him toward the gate where there were already others waiting.
Come on.
I nodded. It had been some time since I practiced, and the surge of adrenaline made my body tremble. The roars from outside were deafening. I went up the stairs, looked over the barricades, and gasped at the sight. They dragged survivors of their attack forward. They screamed and struggled to get away. But it was pointless. They were nude and their bodies coated in dry blood. They were held in place with chains in their bones, preventing escape. Most of the skin weavers were hunched over, flailing their arms and behaved more like beasts. Many already had bloodied wounds. All had been partially skinned alive. Not that it impacted their desire for bloodshed. Their leader, I'm guessing, was strangely calm compared to the others around him. He stood down below and looked up at us, just out of range of our weaponry. He was taller, with perfect posture, and rested his arms behind his back. Around his eyes were darkened, making his face look hollow. He stared up at us, holding a bare-chested woman by her tattered hair. She wailed, lifted her hands, and it took me a moment to realize they had been cut off. The jeers of the defenders faded as many of them recognized her. She was one of their own. What the fuck? I whispered.
Fucking bastards.
I heard Bruce and others on the walls murmur their growing fear for her, and what would happen to them. Their eyes wide, looking to each other for support, and soon fear spread through the ranks. The leader of the skin weavers lifted his free hand in the air. We were all silent. I expected a roar, or for him to rip her throat out. Instead, a disturbingly calm voice rang out.
Silence. A choice is now before you. Come out, bring all your supplies, and lay them at my feet. Most of you will die, yet
He paused to consider the correct number.
7 will survive.
In another life, I imagined him being kind, charismatic, but here that ability was used far differently. His gaze moved from one defender to another. Instantly I saw their bodies hunch, trying to avoid him. And finally, his eyes met mine. They were cold. No anger, no fear, nothing.
Can you get a shot?
Bruce whispered in my ear. I wasn't close enough, and the leader moved too much. My hands couldn't stop trembling, and I shook my head.
Fuck.
What's going to happen? Behind the gates they muttered to each other, panic-stricken and unsure of what to do. Some were backing away from the gate, their bodies instinctively wanting to get to safety. Without an answer, the leader lifted a jagged blade. He slowly hacked her head off, until it clung on with barely a slither of skin. She made a choking, gurgling sound, He yanked it so hard the skin ripped loudly. Her legs and arms twitched as her body crumbled. He held her head up by the hair, kissed her deceased lips, and threw the head toward us, only for it just to land outside the gate. I heard and smelled some of the people vomit or defecate in fear around me. He was flanked on either side by the skin weavers, who jumped up and down, roaring into the night, eager for blood and suffering.
Patience.
As though he spoke to hostile animals, then addressed us.
I do not like to be kept waiting.
We didn't know how many others they had taken prisoner. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My mind rocked from indecision, fearing every single outcome. I heard screams behind us. The skin weavers had broken through somehow. I managed to breach their defenses. The shrieks were loud. Instantly they began killing the traders and citizens of the trading hub. Some of the defenders on the walls left to protect their family and friends. Suddenly I could smell and feel fire. I looked at the gate and it was in flames. Some focused on putting the flames out before it would spread to the tent homes and stores. It was pure chaos. I looked out and saw the leader of the skin weavers. He stood quiet and still while the rest charged at us.
Come on, we need to get out.
Bruce grabbed me,
We need to get somewhere more defensible.
practically dragged me away, and we were followed by other guards and traders. We headed toward a stone building with defenses surrounding it, pikes in the ground, barbed wire at the base, and windows with bars on them. I ran and ignored people in pain around me, bloodied and wounded. They were unable to keep up when people fled. I saw Tom, the teenage boy's head and shoulders, draped across one of the skin weavers. What of Trev and Val? They must be dead. A group of skin weavers pulled me from Bruce's grip. We called out to each other, and there was no way I was going to let them take me alive. Somehow my rifle was yanked out of my hands, and I scrambled to pull the knife out of my belt. I sliced upwards. The fingers dropped to the floor, and the skin weaver let out a roar of rage. It backhanded me hard and punched me in the face. My head swam. I could taste the metallic taste of blood. I stumbled, falling backward, and tripped over the bloody torso of one of the traders. I shuffled quickly to try to escape, dizzy from the blow, my knife up and ready to strike. Would I have to pay the ultimate price? A hand grabbed my hair and dragged me. I lifted my knife to strike at my wounded attacker, who shook me roughly. I felt a hand at my wrist, twisting it until I was forced to drop it. I looked up at Trev's exhausted face, and never thought I'd be relieved to see him.
Come on, get up. We have to go.
My rifle?
We can get it later. Up, move.
I picked up my knife, and saw a tear-stained Val beside him, and the three of us moved back through the medical tent. It had been looted. Bandages and other items spread all over the floor. Tom's body lay in a pool of blood. His limbs had been severed, skin flayed, and his head and shoulder were missing. I found a note, clearly written in haste.
Go under the bridge in the main building to get out. It will take you to the other side. The main building has more weapons. It
ended in a smeared, bloody handprint.
Perfect. We'll get Bruce and the others out if we can.
Trev murmured, a rifle in his hand, and he was roughly dressed, half in his traveling clothes and a hospital gown. Val didn't answer him. She followed him through the maze of tents, under the bridge used as a drain, and soon we found the entrance to the main building. If we could get in, we'd be able to get out, and then wait for the skin weavers to commit their atrocities. The main building was made of brick and stone. It had been cared for and survived the world's destruction. It was fenced with a mess of barbed wire, trenches with unknown terrors, and large, dangerous spikes to keep people away. I thought I spotted Bruce up top, firing down at the skin weavers, who were trying to climb over. They didn't care about their lives. I saw the skin weavers leap through the barbed wire and get mangled up in it. If they felt pain, they showed no sign. It kept going. Behind us, the town and entrance had become far too quiet. The dying had long been dispatched, and those were the fortunate ones. I don't think we're going to get through that. Is there anywhere else we can hide? I whispered. We watched a skin weaver run full speed toward the spikes, impaling himself, so others could climb safely over his corpse.
The crazy bastards.
I've never heard of this before.
We waited while the siege took place, and soon it was over. We hid under tarp and rubbish to conceal ourselves, not wishing to be seen. The leader of the skin weavers strode through the chaos and carnage. He wasn't the monster I expected him to be.
Excellent work. I'm so pleased with you.
He praised the nearest skin weaver by stroking his hair, like it was a beloved pet. The skin weaver made deep guttural sounds, swayed on the spot, and the survivors were brought out.
Patience. Patience. We need to see who would be suitable.
All of the victims were forced to kneel, some injured and others gravely wounded. Bruce was missing an eye, but not his defiance. He tried to spit blood at the leader, missed, and was clubbed down.
Fuck you!
Bruce bellowed. He spat his teeth and a mouthful of blood on the ground.
Have you no manners?
The leader asked politely. He whispered something to Bruce before he took a sharpened, shiny blade from beneath his human suit. It was in sharp contrast to the grime surrounding us. Two of the skin weavers held Bruce down by his arms, keeping him in place, while another came from behind to hold his head steady. Like a surgeon with extreme precision, he started to slice the first layer of skin and began to peel it, starting just under his beard. Bruce tried not to give the leader the satisfaction of him screaming. The three of us watched, unable to look away, and helpless to do anything. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Val lower her gaze and bite into her arm to try not to cry out. Trev watched, trembling in rage, and slowly it stopped. A sad, broken look appeared in his eyes. The leader's peeling kept going, and fortunately for Bruce, he passed out from the pain. It reached his scalp, the skull cap visible from a distance. I couldn't see the final severing of skin and tissue, but the leader took the bloody mask and put it on his face, pulling it down by the hair and front part. The other people from the town screamed, cried, and begged, a symphony of despair. He flicked his hand dismissively, having seized whatever he had come for, and said,
Kill the others.
The skin weavers tore at the survivors and left the mementos of their arrival. Still living corpses were hung from walls, as their screams all blurred into one. Choice pieces of flesh and skin brutally removed from their victims. By now, the three of us were looking away from the sight, trying to preserve what was left of their dignity, and prayed we too wouldn't be spotted. Finally, the last screams faded, and we heard the chaotic movement of the skin weavers leaving. They made loud barking sounds, and we looked to see the leader, casually leaving the same settlement he had annihilated. He walked at the same pace and never changed it. I saw his back as he moved through the smoke and the rubble. Bruce, even after everything, was still alive and woke with a scream. We waited a moment to ensure the last skin weaver was gone, then crawled out from the safety of the drain. Val ran over to Bruce. He had stakes aimed at him on every side, unable to fall in any direction without impaling himself.
Kill me! I don't want those bastards to do it.
Unwilling to waste a bullet or risk making a sound, Trev took out his knife, and Val supported his body.
And don't let the others suffer.
I promise we won't. We're sorry.
Hey, shut up and just fucking do it.
The knife was driven through his temple, and Bruce soon died. Trev and Val both moved to different members of the community, putting them out of their misery. I was reminded of what Trev's group did to my village, but it didn't matter like it used to. They collapsed and held each other, We would need to move on before any scavengers came to pick the remains, both human and non-human. The promise of 7 survivors was a lie. I don't know what made me do it. I followed the leader. There was an old gas mask I found on the ground. I picked it up and held it. The skin weavers were herded together by men in old world military clothing, and used shock batons to keep them herded together. With their captors they were docile, jumped and hunched over to make themselves smaller. I saw Bruce's skin mask being handed to, who I'm guessing was second in command, and the leader of the dreaded skin weavers simply stepped into a military truck to drive away into the distance, leaving a trail of dust behind them. There was a strange mist in the air. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.